All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty interesting, something called vibe coding.
Vibe coding.
Yeah, so it's this kind of new idea in software development.
Yeah.
And the basic idea is AI takes over a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to actually writing the code. So
Mhm.
there's way less manual coding involved.
Yeah, and it's really been getting some buzz lately, especially after I think it was a YouTube video that highlighted it.
Right.
So it's definitely caught people's attention.
For sure. And for this deep dive, we've got a lot of sources, a lot of different perspectives, expert opinions, some practical guides that have come out, and even some threads and discussions
Mhm.
from developers who are trying this out.
That's great. Yeah. A lot to unpack.
Definitely a lot to unpack. And our mission, really, with this deep dive
Mhm.
is to try to give you, the listener, a solid understanding of how to use AI for your own coding projects
Right.
without getting bogged down, in all this super technical stuff.
Yeah, just make it practical.
Make it practical.
Yeah. So, okay, let's start at the beginning. Like, where does this even begin? If AI is doing so much of the coding, where do you as a developer even start? I mean, planning must be even more important, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. So one of the first things that people are talking about with vibe coding is what they're calling Vibe PMing.
Vibe PMing.
Yeah, Vibe Project Management, which is basically using AI from like the very beginning, even to plan out the project.
Interesting.
Like actually having AI generate your README file, with the initial requirements,
Hmm.
suggesting a tech stack, even figuring out some initial milestones.
Wow. So instead of staring at that blank page when you start a project,
Exactly.
you've got the AI giving you a first draft.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
That is cool. So it's not just theoretical, right? I mean, people are actually doing this.
Oh, yeah, people are doing this.
We saw examples of this, yeah. Yeah, there's one example where someone used AI to plan a plane simulator game, and the first milestone was literally just get a 3D plane on the screen, nothing else. Just get that plane there.
Interesting.
So very, very focused. And one kind of pro tip that we saw is for this initial planning stage, particularly generating that initial README, some folks are finding that
Grok. Okay.
yeah, Grok,
Yeah.
might actually be better than using something like Sonnet 3.7. So the idea is you might use Grok to kind of get that initial blueprint and then move over to something like, an IDE like Cursor
Yeah.
for the actual development.
Why Grok, though? Like, what makes it potentially better at this stage?
That's a good question. Maybe it's something about the way it's trained or, the underlying architecture of Grok that just makes it really good at that higher level conceptual stage of, understanding the requirements, really laying out a broad plan.
Right. So maybe it's better at seeing the bigger picture early on.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's it.
Interesting. Okay, so once you have that initial plan, though, another key part of making this vibe coding thing work is context. Like making sure the AI has all the information it needs.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
It sounds simple,
Yeah,
but it can really make or break the process.
totally. I mean, if you don't give the AI the right information up front, you're going to spend so much time later correcting it,
Yeah.
trying to get it back on track. It's really about setting it up for success right from the
All
start.
right. And one super practical tip that we saw is literally just ask the AI about its knowledge cutoff date. Like, when was the last time its information was updated?
Oh, that's clever. Yeah.
This is especially important when you're dealing with technologies that are always changing and updating, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, for example, let's say you're using Tailwind CSS, which, is a pretty common CSS framework these days.
Right.
You'd want to know if the AI's knowledge is mostly based on, version 3, or if it's actually up to speed with version 4.
Right. So you're not getting code that's already outdated. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. And it's not just versions. It's like if you want the AI to work with a particular API or framework,
Right.
one really effective technique that we saw was to actually paste the relevant documentation right from that API or that framework right into the AI's context window.
It's like giving it the instruction manual.
Exactly.
Straight up.
So it knows exactly how to interact with that specific technology.
Yeah. So it's not just, making assumptions or trying to guess how things work. It's got the real deal right there.
Right. And another really powerful way to give the AI context and guide its behavior is by setting up rules.
Ah, rules. Interesting.
Yeah. So tools like Cursor, for example, let you define these global rules that apply to all your projects, or even project-specific rules.
It's like giving it a set of guidelines, like a coding style guide.
Yeah. It's like setting the standards for how you want the AI to code.
Right.
And this actually can lead to more consistent and predictable code generation. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. Like imposing some order on the chaos,
Exactly. So some examples of these global rules that you can set up are things like tell the AI to always explain its plan before it actually starts coding.
Right. So you can get an idea of what it's thinking.
Exactly. Or to always go for the simplest solution,
Keep it simple, yeah.
right? Or to use modular code to make the code more organized and maintainable. Or to only make the specific changes that you ask for.
Or no going off script.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to avoid writing duplicate code, like if there's already a solution in your project, don't reinvent the wheel. Look for the existing solution first.
Right. Efficiency, efficiency.
Exactly. So all of these rules are designed to encourage those good coding practices and prevent the AI from, getting too fancy.
Or introducing unnecessary complexity, right?
Yeah. Keeping it clean.
Keeping it clean. And there's even more specific rules that you can use, right? Oh, yeah. There's whole libraries of rules you can import. Like there's one called Patrick.js that's specifically for Tailwind CSS. So if you're using Tailwind, you can just import those rules, and the AI will be even more dialed into the nuances of that technology.
And on top of that, Cursor also has this feature where you can directly index documentation links.
Ah, interesting. So you can point it to the official docs.
Exactly. So for any technology you're using, you can point Cursor to the official docs, and then the AI can actually reference those docs directly.
That's huge. It means the AI is always working with the most up-to-date, accurate information.
Exactly. It's not making things up. It's going right to the source.
And you don't have to manually feed it every piece of information. It can just go and find it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hi.
So you've got your plan, you've given the AI the right context. Now it's time to actually start coding, right?
Right.
But here's a slightly counterintuitive tip. Ask the AI not to code first.
Wait, what? Tell it not to code.
Yeah, I know it sounds strange, but there's a really good reason for it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain.
So by asking it for a plan first, right, you're essentially getting a high-level overview of what the AI is thinking before it actually dives into the code.
So you can kind of see the big picture first.
Exactly. And the prompt that we saw a lot was literally, tell me your plan first, don't code.
Okay, yeah. I could see how that would be useful.
Right. And even if you're not a coding expert, just seeing those steps laid out, it can often reveal that the AI is thinking about a solution that's way too complex.
Right, you can see if it's overcomplicating things.
Exactly. And then you can ask it to simplify.
Ah, okay. So it's like a human review step before it gets too deep in the weeds.
Yeah, exactly. And this is especially useful, this idea of asking for a plan first when you're working on those more complex features, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So another prompt that we saw was, give me a few options, starting with the simplest first. Don't code.
Okay, so you're giving it some constraints.
Yeah. And it forces the AI to think about different ways to approach the problem.
I like it.
And then it gives you a range of solutions, and you can pick the one that makes the most sense to you, the one that's simplest.
Right, and it means that even if you're not a super technical expert in every single area, you can still make those high-level architectural decisions.
Exactly. And one more prompt that we saw a lot just to make sure that the AI has all the information it needs before it starts coding was, think as long as you need, and ask me questions if you need more information.
Right, so you're encouraging it to clarify anything that's unclear.
Yeah. It's like saying, don't make any assumptions. If you're not sure, just ask.
That can save a lot of headaches down the road.
Absolutely. All right, so the AI is starting to code. Now, the next principle that's super important is keeping the tasks simple and testable.
Yeah, keep it manageable.
Exactly. This is really about managing the AI's output, right?
Right.
Making sure that the code it generates is easy to understand, easy to test, and if there are any bugs, it's easier to find them.
Absolutely. If the AI starts throwing out these huge chunks of code that are super complex, it's just going to be a nightmare to debug.
A nightmare. So some strategies for encouraging the AI to keep things simple are to literally just tell it to keep it simple.
Right. Just be explicit.
Explicit in your prompts, or implement the simplest next step that I can test.
Okay, so break it down into testable chunks.
Exactly. Or even change this specific file only.
Right. Give it very clear boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah. And then another little tip that we saw, just to keep things focused and manage what's called the AI's context window, which is basically its short-term memory.
Right, like how much of the recent conversation it remembers.
Yeah, is to start a fresh chat for each new feature that you're working on.
Oh, that's interesting. Kind of like giving it a clean slate.
Exactly. That way it's not getting bogged down by, a long history of previous interactions.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And another cool thing about vibe coding is that you can actually use visual context. So you can give the AI images like screenshots to help it understand what you're trying to build or even help it fix bugs.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So it's not just limited to text. You can actually show it what you want.
Yeah, it can be super helpful, especially when you're dealing with front-end stuff, like the user interface.
Absolutely. A screenshot can often communicate so much more than you could ever write down.
Exactly. Like there's this example where someone was trying to build a 3D plane model, and they included a screenshot of the plane they wanted. And the AI, on the first try, generated a model that was practically identical.
Wow, that's impressive.
Pretty amazing. So it really shows that you can bridge that gap between visual ideas and the actual code
Yeah, it's pretty cool to think that designers or people who aren't necessarily coders themselves can just show the AI what they want
and make it happen.
and make it happen.
Awesome. Okay, so the AI is generating code. It's keeping things simple. It's using visual context. Now, how do we make sure that code actually works and that it stays stable, right? That's where testing and version control come in.
Yeah, the bread and butter of software development.
Exactly. And they're even more important when you're relying on AI-generated code, right?
For sure.
So the advice is clear. Test after every AI-driven change, look at your code, make sure it makes sense, and then actually run your application.
Right.
Test it out in the browser, check the developer console for any errors.
Yeah, don't just assume it works.
Don't assume it works. And while experienced developers can actually ask the AI to write automated tests, at the very least, you should manually check that the main parts of your application are still working after every change.
And it's much easier to catch and fix those little errors early on.
Right, before they turn into big problems.
Exactly, before they become these huge debugging sessions.
And then inevitably, there are going to be times when the AI breaks something.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, or it gets stuck in this loop trying to fix something and it just makes things worse.
The dreaded doom loop.
The doom loop, exactly. So in those situations, don't be afraid to just revert back to a previous working version.
Yeah, take a step back.
Tools like Cursor and Windsurf, they had this feature literally called revert to checkpoint.
Nice, a safety net.
A safety net, exactly. And one specific scenario where you should definitely revert is if the AI starts making random changes to a bunch of files for no apparent reason.
Oh, yeah, that's a red flag.
Even if the app seems to be working, those kind of unexpected changes can make it really hard to debug things later on.
Definitely. It's like, what were you even doing there, AI?
Exactly. And it's also good practice to periodically ask the AI to look for any duplicate code in your project and just clean it up.
Yeah, keep that code base nice and tidy.
And finally, even if you're not a professional coder, using Git and a platform like GitHub for version control is absolutely crucial.
Can't stress that enough.
It's like an extra layer of safety, even beyond the revert to checkpoint feature in your IDE. It's a complete history of your project, so you can go back to any working version. And it's as simple as asking Cursor to commit to GitHub every so often.
Yeah, version control is a must-have no matter how much you're using AI to code. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What about those who are already comfortable with vibe coding, who want to take things to the next level? What kind of advanced strategies and tools are out there?
Yeah, there's some pretty interesting stuff out there, like this idea of applying the scientific method to AI coding.
The scientific method.
Yeah, so it's about having these really detailed protocols and action plans. And there's this whole debate about how long the context window should be.
Right, that short-term memory we were talking about.
Exactly. And how to be efficient with tokens.
Mm.
The idea is to basically give the AI super precise instructions and all the relevant information it needs.
Interesting. So it's about finding that sweet spot between giving it enough information but not overloading it.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's this other cool idea of using what are called agent task markdown files,
Agent task files, okay.
which are basically checklists for the AI to follow.
So it's like a step-by-step guide for the AI.
Yeah, a very structured way for it to work through a task.
I like it. That could be really helpful for breaking down those really complex features.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And if you're doing a lot of work with user interface components, like building out the UI, starting with Storybook is highly recommended.
Oh, yeah, Storybook's great for that.
Yeah, Storybook lets you build and test each piece of your UI in isolation.
So you can really focus on getting each component right before you put it all together.
Exactly. And then there's the idea of using rubrics.
Rubrics, like in school?
Kind of, yeah. So these are basically like grading criteria that you give the AI. And they're especially useful for those tasks that involve more reasoning, where there's not necessarily a single right answer.
Ah, I see. So it's like giving the AI a framework for making decisions and evaluating its own work.
Exactly. And then for analyzing large amounts of code, especially if you're using those AI models that have massive context windows, like Gemini.
Right. Gemini, that one's supposed to be pretty powerful.
Super powerful. There's this technique that people have been talking about where you literally just copy and paste your entire code base into the AI.
Whoa, the whole thing.
The whole thing.
That's a lot of code.
It is, but it allows the AI to really understand your project as a whole. And there are tools like RepoMix and Pastemax that can help you do this.
I see. So instead of just looking at little snippets, it can see the whole picture.
Exactly. And then optimizing those rules that you set up in tools like Cursor is also really important, like telling it to always start a new server after making changes,
Okay, to make sure everything's running smoothly.
or to always try to use existing code instead of writing new code whenever possible.
Reuse, reuse, reuse.
Exactly. Or to consider different development environments so the code works everywhere,
Right, not just on your local machine.
and to avoid generating unnecessary scripts, and to keep files relatively short.
All good practices.
And some people keep a Cursor update file to track all the changes the AI has made, just so they have a clear record.
Like a changelog for the AI's work.
Yeah, and then for UI stuff, there's this informal tip called MIP, which stands for It Sucks, Make It Pop.
I love that.
Right. So it's just a reminder to ask the AI to make your UI more visually appealing.
I guess sometimes you just got to tell it, make it look good.
Exactly. And then, when it comes to debugging, instead of immediately asking the AI to fix a bug, a really useful strategy is to first ask it to give you like 3 or 4 possible explanations for what might be causing the bug.
Ah, so it's about understanding the problem first.
Exactly. And then, once you have a good understanding, you can ask the AI to fix it.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then there's some, UX differences between different coding environments, like Cursor, which is integrated right into your IDE, versus Claude code, which is more command line based.
Right, so different tools for different preferences.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about Cursor is that it can actually search the web for documentation.
Ah, that can be super helpful.
Yeah, especially if you're working with something that's not super common or, a brand new technology.
For sure.
Though it's worth noting that using Claude code can get pricey, depending on how much you use it.
Oh, right, the cost factor.
Another thing to keep in mind is the idea of an AI-friendly stack, meaning choosing technologies that the AI models are already really good at working with.
Makes sense.
Like Next.js, for example, is super popular right now, and it's very well documented, so the AI can understand it easily.
It's all about setting the AI up for success.
Yeah. And just like in traditional software development, having a really detailed project plan, like a PRD and a solid to-do list, is crucial.
Got to stay organized.
How to stay organized. And you can even use AI to help you create those documents.
Yeah.
Grok, which we mentioned earlier, is actually pretty good at that.
Coming full circle.
Coming full circle, exactly. So a typical vibe coding workflow often looks like this. The AI reads your plan, it picks one feature to work on, it builds that feature, it adds some tests, it runs those tests, and then it commits those changes to version control. And then it just repeats that cycle.
Nice and iterative.
Very iterative.
Oh.
And to speed things up, especially on the front end, you can use free UI templates as a starting point.
Oh, so you don't have to build everything from scratch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then as you get even further down the rabbit hole, you can start doing some really advanced stuff, like asking the AI to refactor your code.
Make it cleaner, more efficient.
Or to perform security audits.
To find any potential vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And then there's this whole new world of MCP servers, which are basically ways to extend the AI agent's capabilities.
Interesting, like giving them superpowers.
Superpowers, yeah. And then there are tools like Taskmaster AI that can help you manage all the context within IDEs like Cursor.
Right, because it can get overwhelming with all that information.
Totally overwhelming. Okay, now for one of those impressive examples we saw. Using OpenAI's O3 model with Cursor and Storybook to build a production-ready front end in under an hour.
Wait, what? In under an hour?
In under an hour.
That's insane.
And it was all based on just screenshots and a video transcript.
Yeah.
Like, they showed the AI what they wanted, and it just built it.
That's incredible. What do you think were the key factors there? Like, what made that possible?
It seems like the really detailed task breakdown that the AI did was a huge part of it, along with its ability to generate components with actual data, not just placeholders. This wasn't just a wireframe. This was a real functional user interface.
So the combination of a super powerful AI model like O3, a component-based tool like Storybook, and very specific instructions.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And then what's even cooler is they use similar techniques to then connect that front end to a database and an API.
Whoa, so a full-fledged application.
A full-fledged application
Just like that.
in no time. So yeah, vibe coding has the potential to really change how we think about building software.
For sure.
All right, so to wrap up our deep dive into vibe coding, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the big one is that vibe coding is this really powerful new way to develop software, using AI as your main coding partner. And the key elements are careful planning, making sure the AI has all the context it needs, working in small, iterative steps, and testing constantly along the way.
And it might seem a bit overwhelming at first with all these new tools and techniques, but the fundamental idea is to approach AI coding with those structured prompts,
Right. Give it clear instructions.
and use the features built into these AI-powered IDEs.
And don't forget, this is just the beginning. This field is evolving so fast.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we encourage you to explore these tools, try them out in your own projects, see what you can build.
Yeah, there's a ton of potential here to unlock new possibilities.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you to consider. As these AI coding agents become even more sophisticated, how do you think this is going to change how we think about software creation in general? And the role of the human developer?
That's a good one to ponder.
The big question.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.